All right, so we're going to finish up this drawing here of the skeletal muscle. So far what we've done is we've drawn the muscle attached to the bone, and then we pulled one of the fascicles out and zoomed in on that fascicle. So we're going to take a look at what's on the inside of this fascicle here. So inside of this fascicle, you have bundles of muscle fibers. I'm going to draw a couple of bundles of muscle fibers. So these bundles of muscle fibers, notice they're separated from each other with this white space. This white space is actually the endomysium that we were trying to point at earlier, yesterday. So endomysium is between all of the muscle fibers in a fascicle. So a muscle fiber, when you look at it, you're going to see these little things that make up a muscle fiber, and we're just drawing little dots here. And so this is your muscle fiber, so I'm going to label that muscle fiber. And the more common name for a muscle fiber is a muscle cell. So for some reason a muscle cell, it's just like a normal cell, except you call it a muscle fiber instead of cell. And it's just a really, really, really long cell that goes all the way through the fascicle. What we're going to do is we're actually going to pull one of the muscle cells out and take a closer look at that muscle cell. Okay? So we're going to pull this muscle cell out. And this drawing is going to be slightly challenging. Don't freak out. Okay, so I should probably turn it right side up. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to cut into this muscle fiber so you can see the inside.
Oh, okay.
So it basically looks like, you guys know the water slides that are closed off and then you come out the end? It's supposed to look like that.
Okay. Except like.
Yeah, just draw that.
Except that you have to have like a little bit of artistic ability.
Nah. Lines, they're all just lines, right? You don't need to be artistic. You just gotta know how to draw lines. Oh, you want some perspective? It's about 2 inches. Because I have something else to draw on this side. Ew, you're sitting right there. Is everyone okay? No one's okay. It'll be fine. Alright, so what we have here is, this is a tube. Okay, kind of like a water slide that's closed off. And what you've done is you cut into the tube and across so that you took off this little piece so you can see what's inside. Now, since this is a muscle fiber or muscle cell, what do all cells have? All cells have an organelle that's very important. Nucleus. Oh, it has mitochondria too. But we're going to draw some of the nuclei in this muscle cell. So here's a nucleus. Here's another nucleus. And you can't see that very well. Here's a nucleus. It's not much better. I just drew a circle, like an oval, and filled it in. So that's a nucleus. And inside of each cell, a muscle cell is actually made up of a bunch of long proteins. So more tubes inside of this tube here. So I'm going to draw one of the long proteins, and it actually travels the whole length of the muscle cell. You can do it. We're going to draw one coming all the way out here. And I'm going to leave a space for one that we're going to pull out later. Hey man, I didn't discover the muscle cell.
Oh.
So you have a whole bunch of tubes inside of that tube.
How do you make it look like that? It's so hard.
What?
It's so hard.
I know. You know what's funny is this is the second time you're drawing it because you drew this for your notes too, right? Yeah. More? It's really hard to see on the screen. Sorry. Alright, so notice you have all of these tubes. These little tubes are called the myofibrils. And they're a collection of long proteins. And you have a lot of myofibrils. And when you have many myofibrils put together, you have a muscle cell. So that means a myofibril is technically a muscle cell unit. It's the building block. You put a whole bunch of the units together, you actually get one muscle cell. Notice you have all these tubes, and they're actually wrapped by this layer. So think of it as you have a whole bunch of straws wrapped in saran wrap. Okay? So this saran wrap layer, this is actually the outermost layer of the cell. In a normal cell, what is the outermost layer? Either cell wall or cell membrane. This is actually the cell membrane right here, except in a muscle cell it has a special name. It's called a sarcolemma. It's basically just the cell membrane, which means its job is to actually let things in and out of the cell. So in order for it to let things in and out of the cell, it has to have these little holes on the sides or that lead to the outside world. So I just drew little holes on the sarcolemma. Those holes are connected to these tubes that wrap around all of the myofibrils. So I'm going to draw this little tube right here that wraps around the myofibril. It's just a line. So there is a there's a tube right here on this myofibril, a tube on this myofibril, a tube on this myofibril. And those tubes are called transverse because it goes horizontally with the tube. Transverse tubules. And they basically let things in and out of the cell. They let things come in and then go to each myofibril. So it's like a freeway that connects all of the myofibrils. Also on top of the myofibrils are these structures called sarcoplasmic reticulums. And it looks like a net covering every myofibril. And I can't really draw nets, so I'm just going to draw a bunch of X's on the myofibril. So you're drawing a net on the myofibril. Can't see that too well. Anyways, all of the X's I just drew represent the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Like the endoplasmic reticulum, it actually is endoplasmic reticulum, but because it's in a muscle cell, it has its own name. It does the same stuff. It helps with the proteins that are produced by the cells. It actually also has another job in muscle fibers. Sarcoplasmic reticulum helps with proteins, but it also stores calcium ions. In order for your cells to do work, like lift up your pencil and draw, you need calcium. If you don't have it ready, your muscle cells won't be able to do the work. So that's why you have to have storage ready. So for example, if I told you to get up right now and start jogging in place, one, you probably wouldn't even do it. But two, you would need lots of calcium ready. and your muscles have to have it on hand. Your muscles can't just sit around and wait for you to drink milk and then start jogging in place, okay? So it has to store the calcium for use during activity. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull out the myofibril, last thing we're pulling out. So I'm going to make it look like there's one more myofibril here. I'm going to zoom in on this one. So this is a myofibril, so I'm going to draw a little label down from up here. Myofibril. A myofibril is actually made up of two proteins, actin and myosin. Now, actin protein is pretty interesting because it comes in a very particular shape. It comes in a long stringy shape that forms a zigzag pattern. And when you have that little zigzag pattern, the actin actually has these little filaments that come off of the peaks of each zigzag. And the filament comes towards each other, but they don't actually touch. So these are all actin proteins. In between each actin protein, you have a second protein called myosin. So myosin is in between the actin, and it is much thicker and shorter. This is myosin. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to redraw this, but bigger, just so that I can label everything. I have a little corner left in the bottom right. If you have space, you can draw in that corner too, or you could move to any other corner. So I'm going to redraw the actin filament bigger. And if you need help, you want to pay attention to the number of peaks that you have, because the two actin filaments, they're actually supposed to mirror each other. So we have our actin filaments, and we have these little filaments off of those lines coming towards each other but not actually touching. And in between the actin filaments, you have myosin. So I'm going to go ahead and label that. These zigzags are actin protein, also known as the thin filaments. And then in the middle, you have the myosin protein, also known as the thick filament. Now, notice how the actin proteins form this zigzag shape. So this zigzag line is called the Z line. This zigzag line is called the Z line. So there is multiple zigzag or Z lines. When you have a Z line, a myosin protein, and another Z line, that's known as a sarcomere. And it's because of these two proteins, the actin, the myosin, and the actin, thanks to these two proteins, when you contract your muscle, it's these two proteins that are interacting. Yeah, that's that part. And we'll talk about that next week a little bit closer in detail. Sorry, I didn't realize you couldn't see that. So when you have actin, myosin, actin, you have a sarcomere. And it's the interactions here that allow you to contract your muscles. And then, like earlier, we were trying to come up with a clever way to memorize actin and myosin. And then we came up with myosin is in the middle between the actin. And if you're acting up and zigzagging through the lab, you're going to get kicked out because it's on the outsides. If you come up with anything better, let me know, because that was pretty terrible. But yeah, so if you're going to review the structure of skeletal muscle, you're going to have to say that when you have actin and myosin together, that forms a sarcomere. And sarcomere together make up a myofibril, which are covered in and all of those together are wrapped up with a sarcolemma, and that is known as a muscle fiber, which is just another word for muscle cell. Muscle fibers are separated from each other by this connective tissue called endomysium, and that endomysium wrapped around the muscle, all these muscle fibers, is known as a fascicle, which is just a bundles of muscle fibers. Fascicles are wrapped with connective tissue called paramecium, and all the paramecium is wrapped with a layer called epimecium, which is wrapped with fascia, which forms an excess piece called the tendon, which attaches to the bone. Okay, so that's one way to study at home.